I want to introduce Christopher Baker, one of our senior consultants who has been working with React for the last 4 years. Today, he's going to explain more hooks that ship with React and how you can use them for more advanced features.
So as Jason mentioned, I will be sort of continuing where Adam left off on React hooks, covering useRef and useContext. First, though, I want to do a brief review of useState, which he covered. So within React, there's a couple different ways to store data between renders. The most common one is useState. When you call that useState function, you get an array back, which has your current value and has a setter. The value is just whatever the value you've set, and then you call the setter anytime you need to change that value. And the important part here is that when you call that setter, it causes a re-render of your component so that you will then get the new value later. useRef is very similar to useState, gives you some data that you can maintain between renders, but it does not cause an update like useState does. There's another use of useRef is to easily expose DOM elements so that you can access them directly, which is sort of the original. It's originally how refs were used, but as things change, and with the introduction of hooks, they've kind of introduced this other sort of data behavior of refs, which I personally find I use more frequently. And the one interesting weird caveat, I guess, with refs is you get an object that has one property called current. You can't add any more properties. All you have is the current, but you can replace it, which I will show you in a minute. So like with useState, you call useRef. The difference is instead of getting a value and a setter, you get an object that has that current property, which you can read just like you normally would, and which you set directly. This does not cause an update like setState does. So even though they're both used for maintaining data, the one causes a re-render, the one just updates the object immediately and you have access to it right away. This sort of example that I'm showing you here where we're using it for an input is not a particularly common use case. This is a very simple one as an example. A much more common use case would be to integrate it with external libraries, in this case, Google Maps. So for this example, I need two different refs. I have an ELRef, which will be attached to my DOM, and then I have a map ref, which will get the output of the Google Map so that I can access it later. So first thing we need to do is attach that ELRef to the DOM, and the only way to do that is to just pass that as a ref property into React. React sees this, and it's sort of built into React. It automatically assigns the DOM element instance to the .current. And then because we're now depending on the DOM, we need to work inside of a use effect so that we have access. When this code runs initially, there is no DOM yet. The use effect will run after those changes have been pushed to the DOM. So then we have access to our el.current, which in this case we pass into our Google Maps constructor, and that gives us the instance which we assign to map.current. So from here you would have an on-click that references map.current to add a pin or however that works within your particular app, but you'd have access to the map.current to continue mutating things. The second one I wanted to cover is useContext. React does consider this a bit more of an advanced hook. I find it extremely useful though, and will generally use it once on every project. I just can't seem to not need it. Primarily what its purpose is to create data at a high level or sort of at the base of your app and access it somewhere deeper, lower in the tree without having to constantly pass your data down at every level to get it all the way down there, the prop drilling. And then one of the things that I do, it's not strictly necessary, but I will show an example, is that you can create your own custom hooks to simplify access to that context so that you can simplify your knowledge of the context, which I will explain more in just a moment. So the example I'm going to show you is a theme provider. So this is the theme information that we want to make available everywhere. Specifically, we'll make either the blue or the red. So we'll have the colors and the sizes. In order to, when talking prior, we thought it was easier to explain the use of these components and then show you how they're created. So we're going to create a theme provider, and we tell it which theme we want, if it's red or blue. And then inside of that, we can have, in this case, our button component, which consumes that theme. Even though it doesn't receive those props, it can access that data, which is the button component. So these use color and use size are custom hooks that we'll create in just a moment. We tell them which color we want, if we want the background or foreground, or which size, in this case, button. Then we can pass those down to our styling system to render appropriately. So the theme provider itself, as I said, we need to pass in the theme string, and that themes object we had before will use the themes string and that themes object to grab the actual theme set we need, and we pass that into the value of the theme context.provider. That theme context is something that we get from React. This is sort of a unique key that allows us to associate, to declare which context we're dealing with at a time, because a component can have as many different contexts as you want. It can just only have one of each. So each time you're doing context, you create your own context object to maintain that, which is where this provider component comes from. And then when you give it that value, that's who you get later when you call the useContext with that same context object. Whatever your value was is what you get out of it. In this case, we're going to pull the colors out and return the particular color, or pull the sizes out and then return the particular size. These two hooks are extremely simple, though this is a pattern that I find myself using quite a bit. It just sort of simplifies, you just say, I just want the background color. I don't care what the colors object, I don't care where the colors object is located. If you decided you needed to add extra things to your theme object, all you'd have to do is fix these custom hooks so that everything ties together. You don't have to worry about changing all of your components that use that object. So it sort of simplifies knowledge of your context. And then the one other note on the consumer is that you can nest, oh, I didn't have a slide for that, sorry. You can nest theme providers. So at the top of our layout, we have a red theme where we have a left button. And then inside of that, we have a blue theme, which renders another button. In this case, the button will be blue just because it's using the blue theme. So when you nest providers like this, you only get the data from the closest provider. So that inner button at the bottom would only have access to the blue thing. It doesn't know anything about the red thing. As far as resources, I would recommend that you have a look at Adam's talk 6 weeks ago, which is posted to YouTube on the Bitovi channel. Also, the official docs on useContext and useRef, those short, are pretty comprehensive as what they cover. And then lastly, I also wanted to plug that Bitovi does do React consulting. If you have any questions, want to review, we have an offer of a free 30-minute review of your app on our website. If you go to that link, and these slides will be posted on the Bitovi forums as well as on the YouTube link. So if you check out our Bitovi consulting or React consulting, you get a free review. You can schedule to see how we can help you, etc. Any questions?
Christopher, is the context, is there like a top level registry? Maybe you said that, but I kind of, it passed me, where just the whole app is aware of those various contexts that you create and you just pluck the one you need? Or do you have to explicitly tell or turn it on or something?
You explicitly use that provider component, and that's what says, that's what creates a context object, and it's only accessible to children of that component. So there's not like overarching, it's at each point where you use that. So in the case,
siblings would not be aware. Oh, sorry. Siblings would not be aware unless you were.
Correct.
Okay.
So I guess I should have mentioned that, is that when you have the context provider, only children of that provider have access to that data.
Great, thank you.
Why not just use Redux, Christopher?
Redux is a very specific data management system, and sometimes your data doesn't really fit that model. Like with themes, trying to put your themes in Redux is probably not isn't really going to fit the Redux model very well. There's certainly a use case for Redux. This is just more how to use context yourself.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Redux personally. I just wanted to see what you would say.
Any other questions?
I'm kind of for the theming scenario, context makes sense to me, but I'm worried that there turns out to be a lot of because I've used this. The thing I didn't like about it is it creates this unexplicit dependency. Context does, and so you're trying to test a component. It's really nice to be able to say, here are the props, render this, and let me check things out. But with context, there's now this other thing that you have to wrap around it. So I don't know. So I was wondering what you thought about that, and I don't know. Is there? I mean, I guess you would probably agree that it can be overused. I don't know what there's kind of a.
Yep. So it does create that sort of hidden dependency in that in order to use your component, it does need to be inside of a provider. Usually when I'm testing, I will often, if I have and I think you probably even saw this in the project we worked on, if I have a context that I need in the entire app, I will put that in my testing framework so that everything has access to sort of a default context that fits that, even with all the functions and everything it needs. One of the things that's also come up, which I meant to mention and forgot to put in the slides, sometimes you want to create a component that can be used in context or not. Like that button component, the way I designed it, only works when it has a theme context. When you call create context, though, you can pass in an object that's sort of the default value. So if you use context but are not in a context scope, it will give you that instead. So you do have a way to create components that are not that don't have to be in that as a child of the provider. They still get a data object that they can use, and so in that case, then they can detect if they're in it or not and behave accordingly. So I've done that for tests a number of times for simple stuff too, is just make sure there's a default that makes sense. Even if I'm not using it in the app, it'll get used in the tests just to simplify the testing. But there's definitely the possibility of overusing context and complicating things too much. It opens a door that's useful, but is a very big door.